Hillary was right. My neighbor's kids proved it, petty revenge. The silence after Deborah left was almost deafening. For the first time in weeks, I could hear the birds chirping, not the screeching karaoke emanating from next door. My divorce had been amicable, but Deborah, ever the stickler for appearances, had made no secret of her displeasure at the new neighborhood dynamic. Property values. Mark, think about property values, she'd said, her voice tight with disapproval, as she surveyed the half-dead rose bushes Tiffany and Chad had gleefully trampled. Before the Petersons arrived, my life was a carefully orchestrated symphony of solitude. Wake up, coffee, check emails, work IT, thrilling stuff, maybe a quick gym session, dinner, a book, bed. Weekends were for lawn care, catching up on projects around the house, and enjoying the blessed quiet. I even liked mowing the lawn. The rhythmic hum of the engine was meditative. Then came Brenda, Gary, Tiffany, and Chad. An explosion of noise and chaos that detonated right next to my meticulously curated piece. Brenda, perpetually sporting a too bright smile and casserole dishes filled with something vaguely resembling food, was the vanguard. Welcome to the neighborhood, she'd chirped, handing me a plate of what I later discovered was dry, flavorless cornbread. It takes a village. You know, I inwardly groaned. It takes a village, a phrase that always sounded faintly threatening, a veiled demand for communal sacrifice. I'd never understood the romanticism. Seemed like more work than it was worth. Gary was a larger version of Brenda, all booming laughter and back-slapping bonhomie. He promised to have me over for a barbecue real soon, a promise that hung over me like a sword of Damocles. And then there were the children. Tiffany, a miniature tornado of glitter and defiance, and Chad, her slightly less destructive but equally annoying sidekick. The first few weeks were an assault on my senses. The parties started innocently enough. A few friends gathered on the Petersons' back deck, the murmur of conversation drifting through the air. Then came the karaoke machine. Brenda, bless her heart, or maybe not, fancied herself a singer. Her rendition of Sweet Caroline still haunts my nightmares. The lawn was another point of contention. My own was meticulously manicured, a testament to hours of weeding, feeding, and obsessive trimming. The Petersons, a jungle of weeds, dandelions gone to seed, and patches of bare earth where Tiffany and Chad had clearly been conducting some sort of excavation project. I tried talking to Gary about it. Hey Gary, I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. The weeds are starting to spread onto my lawn. You might want to think about mowing. Gary chuckled. Relax, Mark, it's just grass. Kids like playing in it. And leaving their toys in my yard, I noticed. He shrugged. Kids will be kids, right? That was the first time I felt a flicker of something akin to rage. The children were becoming increasingly bold. They started using my fence as a backstop for their baseball practice. The constant thud of the ball against the wood was maddening. Then came the chalk drawings on my car, Tiffany, Chad, forever. And finally, the broken window. A stray baseball, they claimed. An accident. I installed security cameras. The footage was enlightening. Tiffany, giggling, deliberately aiming a baseball at my window. Chad, gleefully kicking over my carefully arranged flower pots. Brenda, watching from the porch, a faint smile on her face. I went to the HOA. Mrs. Abernathy, the president, listened politely to my complaints, but Brenda, armed with a tray of suspiciously soggy brownies, managed to charm her way out of any serious consequences. They're just so enthusiastic, Mrs. Abernathy gushed, patting Brenda's hand. And they're new to the neighborhood, we need to be welcoming. Welcoming. That word felt like a personal insult, Deborah called. She'd spoken to Mrs. Abernathy. Mark, she told me the Petersons are causing a bit of a stir. You need to do something. Our property values, what do you want me to do, Deborah? Build a wall, just talk to them, reason with them. And for heaven's sake, mow their lawn, reason. Right. Sarah, a younger colleague at work, became my confidante. She listened to my escalating tales of woe with a mixture of amusement and sympathy. You need to fight back, Mark, she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Petty revenge is the only language they understand. Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor on the other side, was surprisingly supportive. She rarely spoke, but she had a way of observing everything. They're a handful, those Petersons, she said one day, as I was meticulously trimming my hedges. Reminds me of the Millers back in '82. Loud music, wild parties, took care of them, though. She winked. Sometimes you have to fight fire with a slightly damp sponge. I started keeping a log. Every party, every broken plant, every chalk drawing, meticulously documented with dates, times, and photographic evidence. I researched local ordinances and HOA rules. I was becoming an expert in suburban warfare. The breaking point was the gnome, another party, louder than ever. Tiffany and Chad, fueled by sugar and a complete lack of supervision, were running wild. I watched, seething from my living room window as Tiffany picked up my decorative gnome, Reginald, and smashed him against my porch. That was it. I called the police with a noise complaint. Then I went outside. The party was in full swing. Gary, red-faced and slightly slurring his words, was attempting to lead a drunken conga line. Brenda was belting out Bohemian Rhapsody with a gusto that would have made Freddie Mercury weep. Tiffany and Chad were throwing marshmallows at each other. I calmly walked over to my sprinkler control panel. I set all the sprinklers to maximum power, and then I unleashed the deluge. A collective shriek went up as the guests were drenched. Gary sputtered and cursed. Brenda's microphone short-circuited. Tiffany and Chad burst into tears. I stood there, arms crossed, a faint smile on my face. Having fun? I asked. The next morning, the war began in earnest. Operation Drench the Petersons was a resounding success. I adjusted the sprinkler timers to douse their lawn and occasionally their guests at random intervals. Mr. Abernathy, surprisingly, was on board. He'd always hated the Petersons' overgrown yard, and he gleefully joined in the sprinkler assault. Next came Operation Strategic Parking. Sarah suggested this one. Me and a few other neighbors who were equally fed up with the Petersons' antics, started parking our cars strategically to make it difficult for their guests to find parking. Deliveries became a logistical nightmare. The UPS driver looked like he was about to cry one afternoon. Then there was the noise war. I started playing classical music and nature sounds at strategically timed intervals during the day, just loud enough to be annoying, but not loud enough to violate noise ordinances. Mrs. Henderson upped the ante by blasting opera. I reported every minor violation committed by the Petersons to the HOA. Overgrown grass, trash cans left out too long, cars parked on the lawn. I flooded them with complaints. Mrs. Abernathy's enthusiasm for the Petersons was waning rapidly. And finally, Operation Poop Patrol. The Petersons' dog, a fluffy white thing named Princess, was a repeat offender when it came to leaving presents on my lawn. I documented every incident with photographic evidence and reported them to animal control. Gary got a hefty fine. Brenda and Gary were furious. They accused me and the other neighbors of harassment. They threatened lawsuits. They even tried to retaliate by leaving flaming bags of dog poop on my doorstep, which I promptly doused with the sprinkler system. But their efforts were clumsy and ineffective. I was organized, methodical, and fueled by righteous indignation. Slowly, but surely, the tide began to turn. The parties stopped. The lawn was mowed. The dog was always on a leash. Tiffany and Chad, surprisingly, started behaving a little better. I think even they realized that their parents were losing control. One evening, I saw Brenda and Gary arguing in their front yard. Gary was gesturing wildly. Brenda was crying. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could tell it wasn't a pleasant conversation. A for sale sign appeared on their lawn a few weeks later. Deborah came over for a visit. She looked around the neighborhood, her eyes narrowed in approval. "Much better, Mark," she said. "Much better." I smiled. It seems the village finally found its pitchforks. The house sold quickly. I didn't shed a tear, but before they left, I had one final act of petty revenge to execute. I knew that Brenda was terrified of bugs, absolutely petrified. So, on the day they moved out, I planted a huge butterfly garden right on the property line between my house and theirs. Butterfly gardens attract all kinds of insects. Bees, wasps, caterpillars. The thought of Brenda having to navigate that insect-infested zone for the foreseeable future filled me with a quiet sense of satisfaction. As the moving truck pulled away, I saw Brenda staring at the butterfly garden, her face a mask of horror. Gary put his arm around her, but even he couldn't seem to muster his usual enthusiasm. I waved goodbye. Mrs. Henderson, watching from her porch, gave me a knowing wink. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence this time. It was the silence of victory. And as I stood there, surveying my pristine lawn, I realized something ironic. I had always scoffed at the "it takes a village" concept. But in a twisted way, the Petersons had forced me to become more involved in the community. I had joined forces with my neighbors, strategized, and fought back. We had become a village, albeit a slightly dysfunctional and vengeful one. Maybe Hillary was right, after all, even if it meant unleashing the power of a strategically aimed sprinkler system.